experience where coming into Purchase, I didn't really know a lot about research at all. I don't even know that I knew that there was research of psychology. Like, I guess there had to be, but like, you know, you don't really know so much that goes into it, and you don't really think of the scientific method or anything like that being applied to psychology, or at least I didn't until I started taking the research methods courses. And I think talking with professors, especially around the time I was doing my senior project, was the most influential part of it. And just the process of doing senior project and feeling like, wow, this is really fun and cool. And, you know, you're contributing to the body of knowledge that we have. And kind of just thinking, oh, I could do this for just the rest of my life, hopefully. So I think that the senior project, and then also talking to other professors who were in social psychology, was what kind of pushed me in this direction.
Alex, hi. So definitely, I think throughout my experience at Purchase, it was a combination of things. I was really interested in the abnormal psych classes, Dr. Siegel's psychopathology course being one of them, very interesting. And then along in combination with the research methods courses and the senior project that gives you a great opportunity to take what you've learned and really utilize those tools and really bring it to life in a research project of your own. So that really gave me a lot of interest in going into the field of research, clinical research particularly.
Dr. Siegel, I believe you're muted.
Sorry. Would you like me to go next?
Yes. Yes, please.
Okay. You know, I could say on the one hand, when I was in college, some of the usual things. One professor I had in particular, who was my thesis sponsor, who was just an enormous influence on the intellectual development, to the point where we still collaborate and write papers together. But that would have never happened in the first place had it not been for my own struggles with anxiety when I was in college. I mean, that's really what got me into this whole gig. I was a chemistry major, and I was going to become the doctor my Jewish mother had always wanted me to be. And I probably would have become that had I not been overwhelmed by anxiety starting in my sophomore year of college. And as awful as it was then, I had to take a year off from college. I'm grateful that it happened. I went into psychotherapy, and I was fortunate enough to have an absolutely gifted therapist who was a clinical psychologist. And it made me it just got me unusually preoccupied with the mind. And how it all worked. So that was the most important experience for me that got me into it. And that's the kind of thing I would never say at a job interview, of course, but it's the truth.
Queen Melendez like to.
Sure, love to. Well, I really felt at an early age when I went into college that I wanted to study psychology, because I really felt that there was a need, especially in the African American community, for mental health therapists. And that was always my goal. One of the things that I didn't understand when I completed my bachelor's degree in psychology was that there were several different paths by which you could go into becoming a mental health therapist. And so I thought this is funny, it's true though, I thought I was choosing a master's program for clinical psych, but it ended up being a counseling program at Fordham University. And once I graduated, they were only paying counselors at that time $13,000 a year. And so I switched to education for many, many, many years, and along about 50, I retooled and recareered and used my credentials to move into the path of becoming a mental health therapist, and have been doing that successfully for a while. So I found out that there are several different paths by which a person could become a mental health therapist.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. That was very insightful. Our next question is, what were the key steps that took you in your college career? What were the key steps that took you to your career and after college to make it where you were today? So, Aaron? Okay, cool.
Oh yeah, sure. Cool. So I think this is like a four-parter. So, like I was saying earlier, that the fact that research was it was just such a booming, like every single person in the psych program is going to do research at Purchase, right? Like everyone does a senior project. And so that was, I think, the single largest contribution to like why I got into grad school. Kind of compounded by the like where my research went. As an undergrad, I did a project with preschoolers at the Children's Center, and that process is there are kind of multiple steps involved with that like aren't involved with just doing research, with adults, because you have the subject pool, and so like I kind of had to go some extra steps, I think, and I believe that that's what, I mean, obviously applying to a child development lab, I think that's what made me stand out. And I think the other things were my interest in statistics. So I ended up taking a programming class with Dr. Tascos, and she kind of like guided me through using MATLAB on different projects with her. And so like it kind of all culminated into that senior project where like I used this applied knowledge that I gained from, learning from Dr. Tascos. And I employed that in my senior project. I mean, like in hindsight, it wasn't the most well-designed study. These kids really couldn't use a mouse, for example. And, or maybe they couldn't use a mouse in tandem with doing this like cognitive problem. But anyway, I think it was just a matter of, I went through like all these lengths to just do the senior project. And I think that my professors vouched for me in the letters of recommendation. So it was like the biggest thing.
I agree with Aaron on a lot of different levels there. So I think senior project is honestly at least for PhD programs that I was applying to, it was just huge because there are a lot of other people who have internships and have experience in research, but in a lot of cases that's just, doing data collection, or they're like working in a lab somewhere, but actually having the experience doing an independent project where you are in charge of every single step. I like really pushed that in my interviews because I felt that was something that a lot of other people don't have, especially coming out of a bachelor's degree program. So I think that on top of like just, internships, and I worked for the Career Center as well, doing research, so that was helpful. And I think grades, of course, are important, but I think they're a lot less important than is assumed. I was actually speaking with this professor from a different school last semester, and he was saying that it's almost like a red flag when he sees people come in with straight A's when he's doing admissions, because he's a lot more interested in what they have done and what they can do. And he, so of course, like grades are important, and you should do well in your classes, but if you're going to go into some kind of research oriented thing, or a PhD program or master's program like that, having the research experience is really important. And I also think that having the relationships with professors, kind of like what Erin was saying, was also helpful, and knowing them on different levels so they can provide some kind of detailed and dynamic letter of recommendation was helpful as well. So like those are relationships that you can start very early on in your college career.
Yeah, I agree with what Jacqueline and Aaron both said. I think taking advantage of the great opportunity that Purchase provides through the senior project is just so unique in the skills you can gain from it. I think it's also important to take the time to look into participating in some sort of research experience outside of your classes. This could be through like interning or volunteering. That was key for me in being offered the position I'm in now, I think. Just, helps you to build your resume and your CV and network with other professionals in the field. And even if you're not doing a ton, you can get more exposure and, it shows you're really engaged in the field. So those were most of the key steps for me.
I want to back up what everyone is saying about the senior project, not just having experienced it myself, but also because I work with students. And I always remind them, if you're doing the work, let it speak for itself, essentially, because when employers look at that, or grad programs look at it, they'll be able to ask you questions. Even if the topic of the research isn't necessarily the most transferable thing to what you want to do, the skills, the organization, the research, it's all fantastic. In addition, as we all know, Purchase College is largely quantitative or experimentation based. I was a bit more in terms of the counseling. So when I was able to study abroad in London, I was able to get a mix of both. I was able to take some counseling classes. And with my internship, it paired up really well. And I'm like, wow, this is great. I really love this part of psychology. But I am ultimately very thankful that I have all this research background because it helps me to understand why things are in place in the literature. So I would say that in addition, I believe Alex mentioned connecting with your mentors, your faculty, your staff, especially for myself as a commuting student, it was important that I was able to make the most out of my time when I was on campus. And even in grad school, I would stick around after and talk to the professor. It really does help it to feel like you're learning something, you're being engaged, rather than just having to do something for a grade or to complete the course. So that definitely helped me.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
Guess I'll jump in. I'm doing I think something a little bit different, but of course, graduate school trying to get in was really important, and especially for my doctoral program, needing to take that GRE test. And so, whatever standardized test that one may need, one of the best pieces of advice that I can give, I know for me, I really prepared hard for the GRE. I found that I had to, do a lot of studying to be able to get the types of scores that were needed for me to be accepted into my doctoral program. So that is one thing that I would also recommend that, along with what everyone else has said, getting that preparation for the testing and also for licensure, um, also that preparation for testing as well.
Can I jump in now?
Yep, yes.
I have a mix of thoughts based on my own experience, but also in response to what some of the younger panelists are saying. For me, definitely after college, having the opportunity to essentially continue what I was doing in my senior thesis with my mentor, and continue to work with her so that we got two papers out of it that were published. That really helped me get into graduate school. If you can get your name onto a publication, it really makes a difference, no matter what you apply to. If you apply to law school, anything like that will really help you. That's hard, that can be hard to do. The other thing that I would say is I think it's really important in the in-between years between college and graduate school to do some real living and soul searching. Those years, for people who aren't quite sure what they want to do, and I was really stuck between going to medical school or going more into like a PhD psychology program. And I was really conflicted about it for years. I mean, I took 4 years between college and graduate school. Um, there is no one path. There are so many different paths, and I really had to feel through um, and figure out, which voices in my head were the ones I wanted to listen to, and what I really wanted to do. So that was very important. And then the third thing I wanted to say is I keep hearing my younger colleagues talk about how wonderful, the program is at Purchase, and it is amazing. And it's gratifying to hear you say that, and especially what Senior Project allows you to do. There's a flip side to that. I think the reason why certain people, because not all students do, but why certain students have such an amazing experience, the flip side to that is you take the feedback that your mentors have for you very seriously. You don't take it as criticism. And I have to say, sometimes, when that feedback is given, it can be too critical. I think professors have to be very careful about the way they give feedback. Maybe having clinical training, I'm more sensitive about that, right? But an enormous difference I see between just students in the classes I've had who go on and develop intellectually, and just amazingly fully realize their potential, and those that don't, is how good they are at really taking in feedback and growing because of it. I can't tell you, graduate school, it's all about that. It's all about learning from authority figures and being able to take that feedback and really make it part of you and grow as a result, and not take it as criticism. That's all. Sorry I went on too long.
Oh no, thank you. That was very good advice. Um, so our next question is, what is one thing that you wish that someone would have told you before you started your career? Yeah.
I can jump in on this one. Something that it's just kind of me and my personality that I wish I would have found out sooner, but I was fortunate to have good mentors to be able to kind of reel me back for this, is that I wish I would have been able to tell myself it's okay to say no when you start working. And the reason is that when you first start a position, you usually want to, make a good impression and kind of be involved in as much as possible. And that's certainly what I love to do. I love to say yes and to work with others. So it was kind of very natural for me. But it was always important for me to keep in mind the role that I was brought on to do, and how do I balance that with all these fun and creative projects I want to be a part of. So I always had to kind of be mindful, or even just ask, I want to be a part of this committee, or I want to do this, this, and that. Is that okay with what I'm currently involved with? Just to double check. So I have a great director, Wendy, who's been able to help me with that. And everyone kind of reminds me it's okay to say no once in a while to just make sure that I don't get burned out, or that I'm really devoting myself to my project. So that's something I wish I would have known sooner, but I was lucky enough to have good people around me to help me stay balanced with that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's very important, especially in the context of grad school, where you're kind of working under people. And yeah, I also think similarly, I didn't realize how mentally demanding grad school would be. You hear it, and not that I didn't take those warnings seriously, but I guess I never could have imagined the toll that it takes on you. It's really, you have to really be ready for it. I think my first year, so I'm a second year now, but my first year was pretty rough. I was trying to balance all these different projects and coursework, and then I had to teach. So it was just things piled on, and all that, kind of culminated. But, I got through it. But, it was seriously a challenge. It continues to be a challenge, obviously, but I think that's why people take, a gap year or many gap years. As much as Purchase prepared me for this, it also nothing can prepare you for this. it's a major challenge to balance social life and your PhD work. But also at the same time, you do have to kind of put your foot down about what time you need for yourself, because you're gonna need it.
I think for me, something that I wish I had known a little bit sooner was how difficult it is to get jobs in academia. So that's something that wasn't really brought up much when I was at Purchase, and I don't think that it would have changed my path. I think I would still have ended up in a PhD program. But with my ideal career at the end of the day being a professor, doing research and teaching and things like that, it is very difficult to get those jobs, and there are a lot more people that are entering graduate programs that could lead there, and those are also their goals. So at least in my program, they've kind of been emphasizing industry a little bit more. I know there are people in my program who are looking to do that, but it's kind of like this shift because everything is really academically focused in a lot of these programs, and definitely in my program, and I guess my school as well. But I think they're trying to transition more to, show people the other opportunities that there are, because it can be difficult getting into, especially a tenure track position somewhere.
I can jump in. So I think that what I've learned after being in my position for almost a year now, it's okay not to know everything, like to have questions, but it's also really important to try to be resourceful in the way where when I first started, I had tons of questions, like most people would. You're at a new university, you have a new IRB board, new system, new protocols, new a lot of things. So it's okay to ask questions, and it really benefited me in the long run. But it's also good to know when to try to find out something for yourself. Like, it gives you better troubleshooting skills. Know when to raise your hand, because that's something that can also benefit you. Troubleshooting skills, being resourceful in your field. So balancing between that, it's okay.
Thank you.
So
Who would like to go next?
I guess I will. I guess the biggest thing is that just trying to research career paths and understanding that there are several different ways sometimes to reach one destination. And so that's one of the things that I would want maybe you guys to consider as you're going forward. I know that many of you may, as some of the others, go into research, but if you're also on a path to maybe, I know the bachelor's in psychology, but the master's may be MSW, social work. You may be able to get into one of those programs that where you can get the PsyD along with your master's, which is a very coveted program to go into. So just to explore all of the different options. Some of it I came in through the back door, but you guys have the benefit that you can explore all the different possible ways in which you can achieve your goal or reach your destination. And sometimes there really are multiple ways. So that's one of the things that I would like to say.
I wish someone had told me how much the healthcare, and especially mental health care, how it was changing, how it was going to be run by HMOs, and the practical impact that would have. That if you were going to go into private practice, you were going to largely be treating wealthy people, which was not the primary reason why I wanted to get into this field, even though I wanted to make a decent living. But that is the reality, especially psychotherapy today, is that most people in private practice, whether they're clinical psychologists, MSWs, what they're charging, the vast majority of people can't afford to pay. Mental health is the one area of healthcare. We have this mental health crisis, and it's the one area of healthcare in which, if you're not, I'm not talking middle class. If you're not upper middle, upper class, you can't afford to get private, health. You can't. It's just not going to happen. And generally speaking, generally speaking, the most experienced people are working in private practices because that's where they can make more money. And mental health care is really unique that way. So I wish I'd known all that. I also strongly resonate to what some of you have said about how difficult it is to get an academic job. The first thing, and I say this to my colleagues all the time, I think we do our students a huge disservice not being straight with them about that when they're at purchase. Whenever a mentee, an advisee, any student comes to me and talks to me about wanting to go into a PhD program in psychology, the first thing I tell them literally is how difficult it is to get an academic job. And that becoming a tenure track professor at a place like Purchase, where there's a research-oriented department, you need to get published, that's not the only way to do it. If you enjoy teaching more, community colleges can actually pay better and be a more practical option. But it's an academic career is one of these things, man. You have to want it badly, really badly. You are going to have to work your butt off, and it still might take a long time to get a job. And then once you're there, getting tenure. Some academic departments, as I'm sure the graduate students here are learning, some departments are like snake pits. And it can be extremely political. I mean, that varies from place to place. It really varies from place to place. But an academic career it's not like deciding, hey, I'll go to law school. There's all kinds of things you can do with a degree like that. And I wish someone had talked to me about the importance of having a marketable degree where you can have different options.
What do you mean by it's extremely political?
I mean that, especially when you're not tenured. If there are senior tenured members of your department who are power motivated, and especially that's what politics is, right? Politics is the use of power. What do academics have? They don't get paid that much money. They don't have that much status in society, right? They have a status in their field. They have a status in their department. That's where, for some of them, that's where if people who are power motivated, right? If that's what's driving them, and it tends to be unconscious, they can make life difficult for people who do not respect from their point of view. If their perception is that you do not sufficiently respect their power, i.e., do what they tell you to do. Working in an academic department is like working anywhere else. There is a hierarchy. And if you're lucky, the people in positions of power, like, for example, the current chair of Natural and Social Sciences, Linda Bastone, she's the kind of person you want in a position like that because she's not power motivated. She's there for one reason. She wants to make life as good as possible for faculty and students. That is her sole mission in life. That's who you want in a position of power. Now, that's why a lot of people think they want to be administrators or department chairs, right? But sometimes unconsciously, they're motivated by other things. And when you, it's not that you have to necessarily suck up to them, right? But if they ask you to do something and for some reason, you know, you don't want to do it, or man, it makes it, and there can be pushback, and put pushback in ways that you're not that it's not going to be obvious to anyone but you, right? That this person is making life difficult for me because I didn't do what they wanted.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm by the way, I'm being frank because this is the real, and it's what I'm saying. It's not true only in academic departments. There's politics like this everywhere, right? In academic departments, though, it can be concentrated because if people are, because that's one of the few things that academics have when they're in positions of power.
I just want to kind of piggyback off of that. So my master's is in bilingual school counseling, and I can tell you what it's like K to 12. Essentially, as a school counselor, part of our training in our grad program is they tell us two things. One, we're not necessarily there to make friends with our colleagues, and two, stay out of the teacher's lounge during lunch. And part of the reason why is if you are there to do your job, and sometimes people want to bring their opinions or their judgments or bias or whatever the case is, it can impact your work, and it can kind of drag you down slowly over a long period of time, certainly. So with the school counselor example, if I were in the lunchroom and teachers are complaining constantly about their kids, that's going to be associated, whether I wanted to or not, with the client, in this case, the child or whoever. So certainly it can depend, and with administrators, politics can be something that you want to keep an eye out for, but also you at the same time will see who are your team players, who are people who are like, yes, like I want to collaborate with you, I'm totally down. Like, you know, you see that they share the same mission with you, and those are people that you always want to keep in your corner, so to speak. So you'll always have a mix of both. It's always important to recognize which is which and how to work with each person regardless, because ultimately you probably will have to.
Well said.
Yes. Thank you, all of you. So we have one more question, and it's, what advice would you give people looking to go into your career? I feel like we've already sort of answered that question, and I just wanted to like put a slight spin on things, because like currently I was kind of thinking of how the job markets right now and coming up are very different considering this coronavirus stuff that's going on. And, you know, it's affecting the economy, and that affects education because, you know, when the economy goes bad, people jump for education. So grad school applications are going to be a lot tougher, a lot more. Next year, I presume that it's going to be harder to get into grad school positions. And I was just wondering if you guys, I mean, you can answer the question, the what advice would you give people looking to go into your career, but I was just wondering if you guys knew anything or any type of insight that you would like to give considering this whatever's going on right now. That would also be very helpful.
I can kind of jump in first because that's something that my department is certainly dealing with on a daily basis, in the sense that there are a lot of organizations kind of across the board that are experiencing hiring freezes. There's actually a really cool website that my director shared with us recently that's kind of like a user-based collection of organizations that have hiring freezes, whether that's for a full-time, part-time, or even like a paid internship or something like that. If you're interested, I can dig it up in my emails and then kind of forward it to Minnefer, and she can share with everybody. But what I will say is it's an important time to, just as always, do applied learning, do internships, because aside from putting something on your resume or making a great connection, having your name out there, which are all, of course, fantastic things, the idea is that there are going to be a lot of people applying to the same position, maybe more so than in previous times. So with that being said, any connection you have to an organization is always going to help you out. So just in case, if you haven't heard of informational interviews, something similar to this panel even, you connect with somebody in the industry and you ask them questions, because you are, for all intents and purposes, professionals in the making. So once you hit the industry and you're there and looking to see what's in the market and how you can market yourself, it always helps to have people who want the best for you, who know you already, and who are willing to work with you. So if you can reach out to an employer and introduce yourself as a student, A good general rule of thumb is people typically like to talk about themselves. So if you give them a platform to do so and you hit it off, they may be a new mentor for you. So that's something that I always recommend to students I work with, whether they're an alum or a current student. Connect with organizations, do your research, and ultimately, if you love what you're doing and you talk to somebody else that does, it can help you a lot because you'll make a connection right there.
So, for the first question, is it my field in specific, or just like like academia? Is it developmental psychology? Like which?
Um, it's just into your career, so it's, I mean, whatever new type of insight that you would like to share, it doesn't have to be specifically for, um,
Okay, sure, yeah. So, well, also about the coronavirus. So, yeah, I mean, everyone's dealing with it, you know. For example, our lab, you know, we've already decided that for the summer undergrads that are applying to be research assistants, you know, we've already prepared them for everything to be online. Um, so I don't know how that's going to affect people's like those specific people who apply to our lab and who get in and who get research experience that is remote. I don't know how much, um, you know, they're going to be taken, or that experience is going to be taken seriously in the market because of its nature. And that's really a shame because what other choice do we have, you know? Um, yeah, I mean, for going into, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can even answer the question without implications of this virus, right? Um, so I don't know. I mean, I think in general, it's good to, so if you're going to apply to a PhD, a PhD program, to sell that you want to research the thing that your potential advisor wants to research. I don't think that's going to change due to this virus. Um, you know, you just have to act like that's the thing that you want to do for the rest of your life, even if it's not. um, I mean, that's, yeah, that's all I really have.
Hi, this is Alex. So if you're like me and you want to work in a lab for research experience to help you build an application for a PhD program in clinical psych or whatever it may be, don't be discouraged if it does take a while for you to get offered a position. For me, it took months of cover letter tweaking and applying and interviewing before I was offered something, and not even before I was offered something, but before I found something I thought would be a good fit for me. I was lucky enough to get hired in a well-funded lab that conducts research in my interest, of severe mental illness and things of that sort. However, I think it's important to mention that even if you only find an opportunity to volunteer in a lab that's not your primary interest, any research experience is good experience. I'm sure you guys have all been told that. It could always be used as something to build your CV and definitely be a stepping stone towards a future opportunity. Or you might think it's a great fit for you. So to go off of that point, I think for me, it was a good decision to take a few years off after college from school. I mean, I'm working, but I'm not in a grad program. I had thoughts of applying straight from undergrad. However, I think it was a better idea for me to take the time and gain more experience, because the amount I've learned in my position here, and still the amount I still have to learn before I think I'll be ready to apply. I think it's a good decision I made to take the time to get experience. And I ultimately also agree with what Dr. Siegel said earlier about taking the time in your 20s to also explore life and find your pure interests and what you think could be a good fit for you. So That's what I would say.
Okay. I think I'll jump in here. Another thing I would say is maybe be prepared to move and to go to other parts of the country, places where they don't have access to people that are as qualified. And what I mean by that is that, you know, where you are right now, it's a saturated area. I'm sure a lot of applicants. I know when I was in New York, a lot of applicants. But when I actually moved to North Carolina, there were fellowships and assistantships and things that were available here that were not available in New York because of the multitude of applicants that they had. So one of the things that I would share is try to look into some other places that will welcome you with open arms and provide some of the resources and some of the things that you may need to move you to the next level.
Can I just piggyback on that? That is such an important point. That is such an important point. Like, New York is not the capital of the psychology world. It really isn't. You know, there are really, if you get out of New York, there are great opportunities in New York, but there are opportunities that are just as good and just as worthwhile, especially for people, you know, young people, amazing training experiences that are not as difficult to get, you know, and they can be, you know, at really good places and really good universities and, you know, and that's such good advice. It really is. I wanted to, something occurred to me while I was waiting, Menifer, about your question you asked, what do I mean by politics? I want to tell you guys a story that I'm sure you'll find interesting, okay? Because this really explains what I mean by politics. Before I came to Purchase, I was a professor at NYU. And, you know, NYU has an extremely prestigious psychology department. It's very hierarchical, right? It's generally speaking, the more high profile, the more statusy, you know, an institution is, the more politics you're going to find there, because the more power motivated people are going to be attracted there. Okay. So, I mean, at NYU, the politics is so rich that clinical psychologists are considered, they're like secondary, because they're not the scientists, they're the clinicians, right? So you can't even get tenure at NYU if you're a clinical PhD. So it's the end of my first year there. I wasn't a tenure track position because as I said, they don't give tenure, right? The head of the department says he wants to meet with me, calls me into my office. I'll never forget, he was so the way he did it, he was so charming. He was so seemingly sweet. And he calls me into his office and he says to me, Paul, I really like you. I have some good news I really want to share with you because I want you to succeed here. But I also have some bad news. This is exactly what he says to me. I'm like a first-year faculty member, right? A real do-gooder. I said, I'll take the good news. He said to me, you've only been here for a year, and you have the highest teaching evaluations of anyone in the department. Had I been at NYU a little longer, I would have known that that was not exactly a compliment. I said, how bad? Well, so what's the bad news? And he said to me, well, because your teaching evaluations are so good, everyone is going to assume, all of your colleagues are going to assume, you're not spending enough time devoted to your research. If you want to succeed here, I've got to give you some advice. Your goal should be to be a mediocre teacher. This is exactly what he said to me. Your goal should be to be a mediocre teacher. You want to get published at least 3 times a year, get a grant every few years. Your teaching can be middle of the road, mediocre, especially while you're getting tenure. And what he was saying two things to me. He was saying to me, it's going to upset the senior tenured faculty if I become known as a better teacher than they are, right? They're not going to like that. And he was basically saying to me, and I didn't realize this until I processed it afterwards. He was also saying to me, stop being such a good teacher, right? I am telling you, right? Like, if you want me to like you, if you want me to be invested in your success, don't be such a good teacher, right? That's what I mean by like, that's an example where someone is sort of implicitly using their power, right? I can't imagine something like that happening to me at Purchase, right? Part of the reason why students have such good things to say and they're happy, you can tell when the students are happy, it's typically because the faculty who are working together are happy. There is a complete lack of politics in the psychology department at Purchase. There really is. Our department chair, Yanine Hess, she just wants to make sure everything works smoothly, right? It's not about these kinds of power plays and people controlling each other and who the students are admiring and who they're not admiring, and that's just, and every day I look forward to coming to work. I look forward to being with my colleagues because it's not political, right? After that conversation at NYU, it took me a few months, but I knew this was not the place for me. Because if I was going to succeed there, I was going to have to play politics. And I was going to literally have to be not as perceived as good a teacher, and spend more time in my research. And I wasn't, so anyway.
Yeah, that is just so sad, especially because you would think that somebody who is like a top of the line researcher should have a lot of, like kind of pearls to share with their students. And it's just, yeah, it's just a shame. I don't know.
I just want to kind of add on to that. I agree 100% in terms of you enjoy coming to work at Purchase. Same thing. I enjoy the staff that I work with. Everyone's great, and working with faculty and departments is fantastic. I think everyone usually that I've spoken to is pretty helpful, and they want to help in some capacity. So I like Purchase, kind of vouching for that. And just one last quick thing that I forgot to mention. So my director, Wendy, is here. She just wanted to say hi real quick to Alex and Jacqueline. And also for everybody, whether you're graduating, an alumni, undergrad, please feel free to use our services. We're more than happy to help. We know it's a difficult time with hiring, as I mentioned, with the freezes and whatnot, but you have access to our services. I'm more than happy to work with all of you. I have awesome colleagues that can and will as well. So just reach out, we'll make an appointment. There are a lot of jobs opening up, as you can imagine, in the health services, mental health counseling potentially, entry-level support for social work, school counseling, nonprofits, things like that. So keep in touch.
Thank you, everybody. So now we're opening it up for some questions. So if anybody has any question that they would like to ask our distinguished panelists, just let us know in the chat, or you can use a little raise hand function or raise your hand in the video, whatever.
Yeah, Darlise, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, because I'm like, I don't think I have a hand. So thank you very much, everybody, for the panelists for coming and doing this. It is really difficult for me to see everybody on the screen. I'm very since Purchase, it's like all in person, and I'm enjoying that more than my online experience in community college. So it's like, oh my God, I need people. Also, I kind of I know because of, unprecedented circumstances that we're all living at the current moment, I kind of just want to get your opinion about the future of, your career, of what it might look like if this persists. What I mean is more of the social distancing, self-isolation, kind of staying at home rules staying in place, how that will affect like your work or your program that you're currently in. I kind of just want to get your opinion, because I feel like because you guys are in it, it'll definitely be something worth taking as an advice, almost, to understand where I might be once I graduate, since I'll be graduating under these circumstances.
Well, I think, at least for me, and what we're doing, a lot of it is just trying to shift research online, which is a lot more difficult for some than others. I was lucky enough that I'm working on my basically my master's thesis right now, and data collection was actually supposed to start the day that they closed the schools, which was fantastic. But we were lucky enough that it wasn't really a huge deal just to move it online. So I think especially going into research in the coming, months or years, or I don't know what's happening, but just having that in mind, being able to move things online or have a contingency plan for what you're doing or what you're interested in doing can be important as well.
Yeah, I think I need an adult to answer the part that, like the more longitudinal part. But I will say, I mean, it's not easy. Like so for example, I work with infants, and the majority, I mean, yeah, most of the studies just, we can't do them. That's it. They're done. We can't collect data. But there are others where we are very lucky to have data coming in. For example, we have a longitudinal study about infant sleep, and we're using actually commercial product that streams video of infant sleep to us and gives us sleep parameters online, and we just get them whenever we want. And so like that's really, not to say that there's any good timing for a crisis, but we're very lucky that we had that in place. But I mean, it's just gonna, right now it's gonna shift the way we do things. My advisor is designing a study. Actually, she got it submitted and through the IRB, where we're asking mothers to film themselves teaching their baby how to climb stairs and descend stairs, and they have to essentially be the researchers for us. Yeah, that's how it's changed our experience.
I can chime in. So for my lab, we have about 7 or 8 ongoing clinical trials right now that are active, with active patients, active research subjects. All of our trials are clinical research with human adults. So like Erin said, everything for us is really on pause, complete halt of data collection, because most of our visits have to be in person. So, things like tapering people off of medications and things like that, are new to, doctors that have been working here for 20, 25 years. So we're all kind of learning along the way together. It's unfortunate that, this really critical research has to be put on hold like this. But I imagine that when we do start back up again, there will be a lot of new policies and regulations for data collection and recruitment. If you're talking, research studies, I imagine they'll really have to be staggered a lot more in terms of, social distancing and things like that, at least through 2021. So I don't know if that would affect, people getting grants or sample sizes. We're taking it one day at a time. So
I would like to add on from like the career or work aspect of it. So something I'll say, and it's certainly a blessing, being a part of a younger generation that's more familiar with technology, and you that are current students have that even further than we do, is just to kind of keep up with the best practices, the best software. Like for example, before maybe it was Skype, now everyone's on Zoom and whatever platforms are the equivalent. So keeping up with that is going to be great. In addition to that, it's kind of going to be a trial by fire, so to speak, in the sense that these skills that are transferable, but very important. So persistence, grit, time management. If you're a procrastinator, this is the worst time to do that. So it's kind of like a wake up call in a sense, because it's not going to help you out. So I'll speak a little bit also about being a grad student. Not necessarily a big pandemic type of thing, but in my first year of grad school, I had a very bizarre and just bizarre and dangerous experience where somebody drove their car into my house. So I was kind of displaced from my home for a while, and I had to balance all of that out with how difficult graduate school can be. And that really taught me a lot about, just myself and rising up to the challenge, so to speak. And as you can see, I got through it okay, relatively speaking. So I think that ultimately, as Alex said, just take it one day at a time. It's always great to see the bigger picture, but try not to compare yourself or your situation to what could be or what if or the ideal situation, because ultimately you're going through your situation right now. And if you have to take some time off to take care of yourself, your family, that's okay. You do what you have to do to survive and to make it to your next steps. But ultimately, and this kind of also quickly ties into what Paul was saying as well, that if you have to take some time in between or your timeline gets a little skewed, as long as you follow your path and you make it your own, you'll arrive to where you need to be. You'll be surrounded by peers, colleagues that will support you, that you're working towards a similar goal. So the outlook at the end of the tunnel is pretty good, but maybe right now it just seems a little more dire than usual.
I'll just say on the mental health side, we're doing a lot with telehealth. A lot of the rules have been changed to allow us. It was much stricter in the past with the HIPAA laws and everything, but they have changed a lot of things to allow us. So it's a real learning curve, because even in terms of the different modalities that we're using, they're giving us coursework in them where we're able to move them from face to face to move them to something that we can do through telehealth. So, and just using all the technology that's been aforementioned. So that's what we're doing in mental health right now.
Yeah, if I could pick up on that. It's interesting. The same challenges that I've had as a teacher in this crazy, remote learning environment, I've had as a therapist, right? So I'm volunteering, actually doing supportive counseling for clinical staff on the front lines, right? So doctors, nurses, other people who are treating COVID patients who are under enormous stress, right? Who are scared out of their minds about, contracting this virus. And it feels really good that, that I have the skills that I can, contribute something. My God, like even relatively concrete problem-focused psychotherapy, doing it virtually, it is so different. Similarly, teaching, remotely in some of the same ways, it's so different, right? Particularly for the way I teach, where I'm really effusive, and it's like I'm multimodal in terms of sensory modalities, right? And it's like, no, there's just this one visual modality, right? And I can no longer feel myself making contact, like seeing that my students are getting it, seeing that I have truly understood what a client is saying to me, right? And that what I'm saying is helpful, right? Or that I'm reaching them. Things that I used to I would take for granted, learning to do this, through this environment is, it's an enormous challenge. The one other thing I'll say that also, though, about like the future to provide some perspective, I've suspended thinking about the future, like long-term future, because the mind abhors a vacuum, right? And when you start to think of, oh my God, like what's going to happen with this in my career, what's going to happen, and because of the current dark reality, your mind will tend to manufacture very anxiety provoking possibilities. But when I step back from this, and the one thing I'm actually confident about, I am confident that this is not going to last forever. Based on what I'm reading, based on what public health experts and virologists are saying, they're going to develop treatments. Eventually there will be a vaccine. The question is, how long is this going to go on for? How long, right? And how much suffering is it going to cause in the meantime? And no one knows the answers to those two questions, right? But I am confident, I have reasonable confidence, rational, reality-based confidence that this is not going to be our reality for the rest of our lives. That just really seems like it's not going to happen, right? So, and that helps me sleep at night.
Jazz, you want to go ahead? Looks like you have a question.
Yeah, on just like a little bit of a different turn. I know both Dr. Siegel and Dr. Queen Melendez have Dr. Queen Melendez, you have your daycare, and Dr. Siegel, you have your practice. So if you could like talk a little bit about kind of like the business aspect of your career, almost like how you got to the stage where you wanted to kind of open your own business and run it that way, and just a little bit of the details of that.
I'm not the ideal person to answer this question because I don't have a private practice right now. I did have one for a couple of years. I gave it up because I just, first of all, there was no way to sustain it without primarily working with wealthy people. And I also wanted to be, when I became a father, I wanted to be able to spend quality time with my family. But when I was practicing, I would just say if it's a private practice, you want to have good relationships with colleagues, because then they'll refer people to you, you'll refer people to them, and those are contexts you make in every professional encounter along the way. Graduate school, places where you train, particularly people you're going through training with, right? Those personal relationships are really, really important in building a practice.
Okay. I'm 63. And so one of the things I would share along that line is that over the course of your lifetime, don't be surprised if you do many, many different things. And so in my case, I taught for CUNY. I taught for different universities in the CUNY system when I was in New York. Was in education, school principal, and so when I moved to North Carolina and I was working on my doctorate, I just needed some income at the time, and so we opened up what we thought was going to be a little small daycare. It blossomed. We have 3 sites, and in doing the daycare, of course, with anything, you have to have really good staff, really good people who really love what they do. So we started the daycare, and we encountered a lot of children with a lot of different behavioral issues, and just began to experience a lot of children with trauma. And along about age 50, I'd been in daycare, my own business, for about 8 years. and began to realize that I could use what I had from my master's to begin, as I stated earlier, to retool myself to actually go into private practice. So I started out as a licensed independent practitioner, and that went on for a while, but then the need became too great for me just to do on my own. And we had a difficult time trying to secure other therapists that would come on board because we're in rural North Carolina. Really small place, very few resources. And I actually don't see many wealthy people because a lot of my children that I have in my practice and families I have in my practice are on the other end of the spectrum, very impoverished, and they receive Medicaid, and we are basically able to make it. We're not rolling in the dough because of it, but we're able to provide a good service. We have 3 therapists that are practicing in the group that I established, and we're doing a really fine job for our community. So it's been a gradual process, many changes, many ups, many downs. So on that note, I would say really be flexible. If you're too rigid, you can get broke really easily. So try to be flexible as you go through this process and see what life will open up for you.
That's awesome. I think that's really awesome insight from everyone who spoke so far. It looks like we have time for 1, maybe 2 more questions. So if anyone has a question, you can go ahead.
Okay, so hi. Thank you, everybody. Everything has been great so far. I just have a quick question specifically for Jacqueline and Aaron on tips on how to go about finding that like perfect match with the faculty that you want to work with for your PhD.
Go ahead.
I don't think I did that in the ideal way, so I'm not sure how great my advice will be, because when I was applying for PhD programs, I was kind of all over the place. I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. I had 3 different types of research that I was interested in, and I felt like I had to choose one of them, because when you're applying for these labs and with these professors, they kind of encourage you to be like, oh, you know, it's all about fit. It's all about, you know, you ending up with a professor who is doing the exact same thing as you. So I ended up applying for like all these different types of labs, which, you know, it ended up working out. So I was fine with that. But I also found that what I'm doing now is actually just those 3 things together. So like I was applying for intergroup sorts of research labs, as well as religion, as well as like close relationships. But now I'm just kind of doing research that puts those 3 things together with like inter-religious relationships. So I think because I think in some ways it is really important to have that like really close fit with professors, but at the same time, at least I was fortunate enough to be in a program that's really open and flexible about those sorts of things. I don't know how common that is overall, but they're really open about, you know, if you know, this is the person that you're primarily working with, but if you have a change in research, then, you know, you can talk about getting a different primary advisor in the program. So that was my experience. I don't know that that is a widespread experience. Aaron, what do you think?
Sure. Yeah, so for my case, actually similarly, I applied to 3 different, you know, training areas: the grad center, NYU, and the New School for Social Research. Yeah. And so for that, I mean, it was kind of similar interests, but 2 of the labs were motor development and 1 was like attachment. I mean, I always was interested in attachment, but anyway, to your question, I'm going off on a tangent now.
And if you're creative, imagine if you can always find links, if only in terms of the skills you're learning, find links between the work you're doing in your senior project and their research. Grad school is all about building relationships, fostering relationships. That's something else I wish someone had told me, right? That's really, and it starts before you're there.
Just kind of want to quickly add to that about building relationships. When I was in graduate school, I love the Career Development Center. As you can see, I'm working there full time now, but they needed help. So I was just volunteering as a graduate assistant. And eventually I got a random email from one of my old supervisors, and she asked me if I wanted to work there part time. And I was like, sure. Like I did the work for free anyway. I'd happily do it for pay. So that kind of turned from part time. They said, you know, we have a full time position open now. Why don't you apply? And then I went through that process as well. So just staying connected. Definitely developing these good professional habits, networking, thank you notes. Even if, you know, you don't necessarily visit them, but, you know, emails, phone calls, texts. Just one thing I like to say to students that I work with now is you may have been the best intern they've ever had before, but that might be somebody else in the future. And if that's the last line of communication you have with them, then you'll potentially be a good memory, but there's no more interactions, there's no more help, there's no more support. So, you know, always try to keep these connections open. And another way to look at it is you can never have enough people who want you to succeed in your life because you won't always have those people. So if you can keep them, please try to.
All right, well, I think we are going to wrap up because it's just about 6. But this was amazing. I can't believe how much that I just learned and got insight into. And I'm sure all the other people on this panel feel the same way. So thank you very, very much to our 6 panelists. We appreciate you incredibly. One quick thing for everyone attending, not the panelists, but the students, ourselves included. We have a little Google form that we'd love for you to fill out to give us a little bit of feedback on how we can host an event like this in the future. Not us, as we'll be graduating, but Psych Club. And yeah, just what your thoughts were. So I'm gonna post that in the chat. So if you could fill out that form, that would be amazing. It's super short. And yeah, this was amazing. If any of the panelists or even any of the students have any closing thoughts, you can go ahead.
Just wanted to thank you guys again. You guys were really great and really insightful for taking this time. Well, I know that a lot of us have a lot of time now, but I appreciate it nonetheless for taking the time to speak with us because it really does help.
Thank you everyone for coming, and to the panelists for taking the time out. I know you all are still busy, even though you have a lot to do. Yeah. Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Stay safe and good luck.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you
Stay
for
healthy.
inviting me.
Safe, everyone. Be well.
Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you
Thank
everyone.
you.
We're gonna end the meeting now. So, but thank you.